My God, I think I found the most perfect how to land video ever. I mean, this guy Chapman Flying breaks down how to land so well. I'm actually envious. I sent this to all my students immediately, and I was like, all of you guys need to watch this. This is absolutely mandatory. And I know there's been other videos before like this, like tons, I'm sure, but just like watching this guy's video and how he actually breaks things down into little pieces, I love it. So today I am going to be ironically breaking down his breakdown on how to land a plane because I want to add some additional input into this and things that I've noticed. Students make certain mistakes at certain points. They do things when they're not supposed to. They do too much. They do too little. So let's go ahead and break this down into little pieces, and maybe I can offer you a little nugget of information that can help you hone in on those landings. Okay, I have two students right now who are hour 15, and I have a 21-hour student, and I both am about to get them to solo. So I'm like locked into this zone. I am beating up that traffic pattern every single day with them. So I feel like I have a nice tight understanding of how to get a student to that next level. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch this video. Chapman Flying, thanks for this video, man. I'll go ahead and link you below to give you full credit.
A full stall landing is a landing where the aircraft is flown as close as possible to the runway and then stalled. This causes it to drop onto the runway in a nose-high attitude without enough energy to porpoise or significantly bounce. Landings in general are divided into four stages.
Okay, so the full stall landing, it's not mandatory. You don't need to land with a full stall every single time. I've had some people really try to get to that point to where they're constantly doing full stall landings. You don't have to do it. He's simply telling you that like if you can master the full stall landing, it's going to give you nice, really smooth, low energy landings. The thing that I've noticed with that is that students will really try to get to this point, and they end up just like over controlling the aircraft, too much back pressure, ballooning, and stuff like that. So this is not mandatory, but this is like preferred. Okay, and you're not going to get this every single time. Even CFIs don't get this every time. Okay.
Stages: the approach, the roundout, the touchdown, and the rollout.
Okay, right here, my God, I can spend like an hour on this, okay? So in a Cessna 172, all right, because that's what I fly, is the approach speed is supposed to be 6.5 knots. The biggest mistake I see you guys, meaning students, or if you're just curious about how we do this, the biggest mistake that I see people make is that they don't lock in that 6.5 knots, okay? So students will be coming in here and they are coming in, they have way too much power in. I've noticed them have like maybe 17, 1800 power instead of 1500 power, right? 1500 RPMs is a sweet spot. Slightly nose down, holding that 6.5 knots. I tell my students to fight their lizard brain instincts because what they do is they come into the runway, they're looking at the runway at this approach part of it. And as we get closer and closer to the roundout phase, about right here, they start applying that back pressure way, way too early. You should be doing you should be applying that back pressure right about here, which is usually 5 to 10 feet above the runway, but it's slow back pressure, okay? And, some people will say 3, 5, 10. I just noticed it's like anywhere between 3 and 10 feet, probably around 5 feet. But this right here, approach phase, biggest mistake I see people make is not locking in their power, all right, and not maintaining that airspeed. I say everything starts and ends at 6.5 knots. Once you have 6.5 knots in, guys, you're operating within the regions of reverse command. All you got to do is add or take out power depending on your glide slope. So if you're low on the glide slope and you're down here, maintain that 6.5 knots. Add that power in there. You can still maintain that approach speed while adding power and getting on top of that glide slope. Okay? If you're up here and you're maintaining at 65 knots, hopefully reduce that power and fall back into the glide slope. Or if you're too far, go around. Understanding the regional reverse command is absolutely critical here. And I see students who are dozens, even hundreds of hours in that don't even fully understand the regional reverse command. So I take them back to slow flight and I tell them, I want you to give me a 500 feet per minute descent maintaining 6.5 knots. I want you to give me a climb maintaining 6.5 knots. I want you to give me a climb maintaining 6.0 knots. I want you to give me, really, because I'm like locking that into your brain. You need to understand that pitch controls your airspeed and power controls your altitude.
During the approach, the objective is energy management. Energy management is getting the aircraft to a particular point on the runway at a particular speed, called the approach speed. To do this, we select an aim point about 400 feet ahead of our intended touchdown point and, as the name implies, fly the airplane toward that aim point.
Okay, so the touchdown point and the aim point. If your touchdown, what he's saying is that your touchdown point is going to be like probably the 1,000 footers, right? It just means that, and I tell my students this, the aiming point means that if I put a laser at the end of the nose wheel, all right, and if I pointed that laser down to the ground, it should be pointed at and held at that second line from the 1,000 footers or the third or whatever you choose, okay? I have not seen a super big success rate on this, to be honest. I'd rather students get the feel of how to do a good approach without having to really depend on the aiming point and touchdown point. That is very subjective, okay? That's just me. And I don't even necessarily implement that in my students. I actually do give my students the aiming point and touchdown point because it's a good guideline. But for me, at this point, 500 hours in, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of landing, I don't even really have an aiming point anymore. I just like I've landed so many times that like it's just part of my muscle memory. And I know that I'm going to touch down on the 1,000 footers every single time because I manage my energy properly. But for a new student, having a touchdown point, aiming point, and a touchdown point is do it.
During the approach phase of flight, a common expression is pitch for airspeed, power for altitude. This means that airspeed is controlled with the elevator. If we see that the airspeed is too low, we push forward to increase the space between the nose and the horizon. If we see that the airspeed is too high, we pull back. If we find that the aircraft is descending below our intended glide path, we add power to pull the airplane closer to the runway. We start the roundout phase when we reach the selected aim point. The goal of the roundout is to drain off the remaining airspeed while slow.
Okay, this is the hardest thing I've noticed for students to understand is when you start out the roundout phase. So he says start out the roundout phase when you pass your aim point, okay? So let's say your aim point is the fifth or sixth line from the 1,000 footers. I remember my instructor telling me this, and my instructor was like, when you get to the fifth line from the 1,000 footers, start the round. I'm like, the fifth line from the 1,000 footers, I'm just trying to keep an eye on my airspeed and the power. And I was like so overwhelmed that like that always went over my head. But if you can lock that in, then do it. All right. So the biggest problem I see students having is when to start the roundout phase. I'm telling you guys right now, you can have every trick in the book. You can have this aiming point, you can have that aiming point, you can have when the cowl goes a certain pitch attitude, or when you lose a certain amount of the runway, or when you see a certain amount of runway, or when you pass that fence post. Every trick, it's not going to work every single time. You're not going to have this. You're not going to have the same conditions every single time. Aim point, sure, that line's always going to be there, all right. But when you go to a different airport, are you always going to have that mountain right there that you're going to turn at, and are you going to have that fence? Like there's like a fence post at my school, and they say that every time you fly over this fence post to reduce the power to idle, that's not always going to be there. Okay, so you need. My point is that you need to get those reps in, guys. You need repetition. That's the only way you're going to make that like mind to muscle to plane connection is if you do this over and over and over again. So people ask me, my students ask me, when do you start the roundout phase? When do you start the roundout phase? And I'll just have them do it over and over again. I'll start rounding out now. Start rounding out now. Start rounding out. Bleed off it because I want them to be a part of the plane. I want you to become the Cessna 172. Okay, I want you to feel what the plane is telling you. I want you to talk to the plane. And simply creating these like strict, rigid rules, like every time you cross the fence or every time you cross this line, it's helpful. Don't get me wrong, but I would rather you feel the plane. So take away from this, my opinion, which is why you're watching this video, is get the reps in. All right, do it over and over again until it just makes sense. Okay.
Slowly letting the aircraft descend to less than 1 foot above the ground. A common mistake during the roundout is to over-control. If you
My God, is this not like the most common thing? I did it. You guys have done it. You guys are probably still doing it. And this right here, you're anticipating the runway. Okay, so bro comes in here. He's like, oh, I'm about to touch down. And they get excited or they get nervous or they get
the
scared
goal of
or
the
something.
roundout is then
Right?
you pull back on the elevator before the airspeed is low enough, you'll balloon the
That was
airplane
actually
back
hard.
to
That was a
control.
hard and flat landing. So he
Less than
comes
1 foot
he's
above the
coming
ground.
in.
A common mistake during the
Anticipates the runway. All right, I see this every single day. Anticipates the runway, and the back pressure you need is like right here at this point. It looks like he's also coming kind of fast. Is like barely, and then hold, and then just bleed a little bit more energy off, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. This guy right here anticipated the runway. He probably had too much energy in. And the more energy you have, let's say I'm coming in way too fast, 75 knots, and I put in just a back pressure, I'm gonna doing up. But if I only have 60 knots, 65 knots, and I apply that same amount of back pressure, I'm not gonna balloon as much. All right, so come in with a good speed. That's why I say lock in that airspeed, right? Lock in that energy. And yeah, he's anticipating the runway here.
The roundout is
And it's this isn't even a this is just part of the process. Like you don't know really how far away you are from the runway yet because you just haven't done it enough.
to over control. If you pull back on the elevator before the air
Now, at this point in time, I don't want to pause it too much, sorry guys, but this is just so good, and I hope that this is helping you. Is
1
that
foot above the ground.
right
A
here?
common
Okay,
mistake
so he
during
anticipates the runway, which is fine. You should be anticipating the runway. You're barreling towards it, but you just applied too much
the
back
roundout
pressure.
is to over
Balloons up.
control.
That right here is a dangerous place to be on high density altitude days because if you balloon like this and you're very slow and you don't have a lot of energy to spend, guess what's going to happen? You just got yourself in a power off stall and you're going to slam back to the ground. All right. So I advise you that when this happens, a big balloon like this, you should probably do a go around. Probably. Unless so when I'm with my students and they balloon like this, if they have the energy and they're still fast, I'm like, you can bleed this off, right? And they're like, yep, because they still have the energy. Or if we balloon and we instantly get a stall horn, my God, you better be slamming on that throttle, okay?
If you pull back on the elevator before
And remember, what goes up must come down. If you balloon, you're going back down. You have to start the bleeding process out all over again. You're flaring again. And then if you balloon again, guess what? You're going to have to bleed off that energy again.
the airspeed is low enough, you'll balloon the airplane back into the air, causing it to get high and slow. The trick to a successful roundout is to level the aircraft off at 5 feet above the ground.
5 feet. That is the sweet spot. You're asking yourself, how do I know when I'm 5 feet above the ground? You'll know when you know. All right? Just keep doing more landings. I promise you'll get it down. Everybody here who's watching this video who knows how to land a plane knows that there's a moment where you finally get it and your neurons will go out to the leading edges and down through the mains and into the power. Like you become part of the plane and you're like, I see it all now. And then you botch the next landing and then your ass again. My point is, you'll get it.
Then allow the aircraft to mush toward the runway very slowly.
Yes.
When you think that the wheels are about to touch the runway, then use the elevator to try to hold the
Yes.
airplane in the air as long as possible.
Yes.
When you start getting stall cues, and most importantly when the elevator starts to feel mushy, ballooning is no longer aerodynamically possible. At this point, you can feel confident pulling the elevator all the way back to the stops.
A really good, smooth, nice landing is when you have the stall horn warning and you're half a foot above the ground, and you're just bleeding off that back pressure to where you can't put any more back pressure in. And I swear to God, guys, you'll have the smoothest touch on ever. You won't even hear the wheels touch. It'll just be like, am I down? Oh my God, I'm down. I didn't even realize it was just so smooth. Like the difference between this space up here and the asphalt, you couldn't even tell that it connected because you had such good energy management.
To finish out the full stall. It's usually pretty easy to tell what kind of landing you're going to get before the wheels touch the ground. If you're getting stall cues above 3 feet, it's going to be hard. If you're getting them below 1 foot, it's going to be good. And if you never get them at all, it's going to be flat. A trick to
This right here, guys, is like one of the most important parts of this entire video.
to the stops to finish out the full stall. It's usually pretty easy to tell what kind of landing you're going to get before the wheels touch the ground. If you're getting stall cues above 3 feet, it's
Yeah. So if you're getting a stall, so a red flag for me as a flight instructor when I'm with a student is that if they're getting stall indications right here, they have a nose up attitude and they're getting stall indications, that is a bad sign. You are going to slam that thing down. So you have two options. Put the nose down a little bit and then hopefully catch it, not slam it into the runway, or instantly do a go around. That's your two options at this point. But if you wait too long, you'll come in flat, all right? Which is what he's
going
saying.
to be hard. If you're getting them below 1 foot, it's going to be good. And if you never get them at all, it's going to be flat. A trick to
Put that in
judging
your
your height
brain.
above the runway is to focus your gaze about 4 runways
Okay, yes. So focus towards the end of the runway, not completely at the end of the runway, but just down the runway, okay? I'm not that guy that's going to tell you to look down at the very end of the runway. Just look ahead of you, because if you're anticipating that asphalt, guess what? You're going to slam into that thing. It's kind of like, actually, no, I don't want to confuse you guys.
stripes ahead. If you focus too close, it'll feel like the runway
Okay, this is a great part of this video. I think that is like really great to focus on.
Way is to
Look how he's bleeding off this energy, guys. And I know you felt it through your CFI before. You shadowed them or whatever, but look at this right here.
focus your gaze about 4 runway stripes
See
ahead.
how he keeps
If you
bleeding
focus
it
too close, it'll
off
feel like
over and over again? I'm not saying you got to aggravate it like that. All right, this isn't Microsoft Flight Simulator. Really, if you just kind of like apply steady and constant back pressure, you can get it. But you know, this is a great landing. I'm not trying to crap on this guy's landing. But see how he's bleeding off the energy? Energy is a currency. And if you spend too much too quickly, that airplane is done. Or you're going to crack the airframe or prop strike or just have a really uncomfortable landing, okay? But energy is a currency, and you need to know when to spend it.
the runway is rushing up at you, causing you to overcorrect and balloon. If you focus too far away, you may be surprised when the wheels touch the ground. The length of time that the roundout takes is determined by your airspeed. If you approach too fast, you may find yourself floating all the way down the runway. If you approach too slow, you might find yourself with very little elevator authority during the roundout, causing you to strike the runway harder and sooner than you intended. During the roundout, you may find yourself struggling.
Ooh, that is a side-loaded landing.
During the roundout, you may find yourself struggling to manage drift and yaw, especially
This
if
is
the
my
roundout's
life
taking
every day
longer than
now.
you expected. Drift is controlled using the ailerons by banking left and right, and yaw is managed with rudder. Find a visual reference point on the aircraft's
Yep.
cowling and use your feet to keep that reference point aligned with the runway centerline. Ailerons and rudder are used completely independently for this purpose. Using them together like we do at altitude is definitely not the goal and causes a side load on the landing gear
Cool.
if
Let's go to the summary real
up.
quick,
We
and
use
I'll end this
pitch for
video.
airspeed and power for altitude to fly the airplane toward an aim point on the runway at approach speed. We round out at 5 feet above the ground and then allow the aircraft to mush down toward the runway surface while draining off airspeed. Then, just above the runway, we hold the airplane off and wait for stall cues until it's time to move the stick all the way back to the stops.
Nice. Great video by Chapman Flying. I watched this like on the way home a week ago, and I was like, I'm sending this to my students. All right. So I hope I kind of like provided you guys a little bit more input into this and my experiences. This guy's breaking it down for you of how to do it. I'm telling you the mistakes that I've noticed and how to get better at it. Okay. I hope you guys like this video. Please leave comments below, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next one.